Aloha and welcome to A Word with Ward. I'm Representative Gene Ward and we're broadcasting from the Hawaii State Capitol on the 3rd floor. And as usual, we have community leaders, opinion makers, and today we have the best of what's going on internationally in Hawaii. We're going to talk about the East-West Center. We're going to talk about North Korea. And to do that, we have the Director of Public Relations, Karen Knudsen. Karen, welcome to A Word with Ward. And Dr. Denny Roy, who is a Korean specialist, North Korean specialist, correct?
Northeast Asia, actually.
Northeast Asia. Okay, so North Korea is one of those Northeast Asian areas of which right now is really front and center in the news. Some of you may be a little bit shaky about what's going on in North Korea in terms of its missile tests. We're going to talk about that. But before we get into what's going on in North Korea and how close Hawaii is to their missiles, let's talk about who's Karen Knudsen. I know, Karen, you and I share a Peace Corps experience. Correct. You and I share East-West Center. Now tell us about yourself.
As you said, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 70s in Chuuk, Federated States of Micronesia. And I think, like you, Gene, that experience changed my life and changed my whole trajectory in terms of professional and everything else, and that's what brought us to Hawaii after being in the Peace Corps.
So Denny, now you know why Karen and I are here. Because, you know, Peace Corps does change your life. Being that you speak Chinese and you're or would you say Northeast Asia? Northeast Asian specialist. What did you do before then, and what's some of your background variables that people should know about before we get into the heavy part?
I guess the event that got me interested in Asia was being a missionary for my church, the Mormon church. I got sent to Korea, South Korea, and decided to go to graduate school, get a PhD in political science, emphasizing Asia. Started out as a university professor and gravitated toward research-oriented jobs, where I ended up here.
So you've been speaking South Korean as if you were a missionary. You must have had some of the language, even though you said Chinese is your more specialized.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but at the time I was pretty good speaker of South Korean. But since then, since my marriage particular to a beautiful girl from Taiwan, it's been all Chinese.
Well, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And Karen, you still speak Chuukese?
I still, Ikisichuk, which means a little bit, I still remember.
For those of you who are in Hawaii Kai who speak Chuukese, you can go to Karen for all the translation of what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I've kept my Malay and Indonesian alive. But it really, it's a life-changing experience. Right. Which now we're going to go to the second life-changing experience, and that's the East-West Center. That's basically where I met my wife. That's where, in the Japanese garden, where President Obama's family, father and mother met. It's a place where, Karen, you have been the director of external affairs for a number of years.
A number of years. Actually, the East-West Center also brought my husband Greg and me to,
is that right?
to Hawaii.
No, it wasn't a Peace Corps marriage.
No, we're not a Peace Corps marriage. We were married before we got into the Peace Corps.
Okay.
After heading back to Nebraska, hard to live there after being around the world, he applied to the East-West Center. That brought us here. He was a student, received his education on a grant. I began working at the East-West Center professionally in 1990. So it has been very instrumental to our lives here.
In short, what do people need to know about the East-West Center? Otherwise, it's been one of the best kept secrets in the world, one of the best institutions in the world, known in Asia by everybody on the street practically, but in Hawaii, not so much. What are some of the things
I think the most important thing we have done is changed lives and changed outlooks of people in the Asia-Pacific region. We have more than 65,000 people who have gone through East-West Center programs. Many of them have gone on to positions of authority in their countries. The quality of the research we do in the region is so highly respected. We have been in the region since 1960. We are the only game in town. We're the only game in town. So we've built up a strong reputation. So we have had impact.
Created by Congress?
Created by Congress in 1960, a bipartisan effort to really bridge the gap in understanding between the Asia-Pacific region, including the United States.
And that's why when you say East-West Center, there's an East-West, because it's to bring those two as close as you can get without one crushing the other or overcoming. Denny, you want to add anything to the East-West Center background or profile?
The East-West Center can do some unique things. It fills a niche that no other organization does, and it's an asset both to Hawaii and to the United States government, particularly in this time when there are so many international challenges that need to be better understood.
You know, some of us in this legislature would love to see Hawaii become the Geneva of the Pacific, where and we're going to get to North Korea, where you bring the North Koreans and the South Koreans, you set them at the table, and you start talking. There's no better place in the Pacific region than here, and I know we did in 2011, the APEC, we were on the world stage, but what's happened with the legislature and Hawaii in the world stage since 2011? We went off the stage and fell asleep after making a star role. But that's only my opinion of it. But I thought we could continue, even though we did have the Conservation Congress when we had a couple of hundred nations come.
And we had President Obama speak at the East-West Center.
That's
We brought
that's
the
right.
leaders of the Asia-Pacific region together during that conference. So I think Hawaii can continue to promote that, given that we have the Pacific Command here, Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies, East-West Center, University of Hawaii. We are a place where people can come together for intellectual exchange, but also Asians feel comfortable coming here. And of course, most Americans like to come here. So we've held really rich dialogues with government leaders and others throughout the region, and it's something Hawaii can even bolster.
You know, when you say that Asians feel very comfortable being here, I'm reminded that my office had done a lot with the Hawaii sister state, with Bali, and so we dealt a lot with the Indonesian Consul General. And the Consul General would say, we'd love to come to Hawaii because when we get on the streets, they think we're just another local guy, which makes him feel very comfortable. I think he's now moved on to other positions, but it's where the Asians who come and it's like, hey, you know, we're kind of at home in a very, very beautiful environment. And quite frankly, having met my wife there, everything became, after the East-West Center, Asian Pacific oriented. My PhD and all the other things that follow from there. So a great place with a great mission, and now with a great intellectual challenge, because we're going to talk about one of the biggest challenges that's going on in the Asia-Pacific region, and that's North Korea. Denny, how would you summarize where we are with the North Koreans before we get into some of the spooky stuff with missiles and whatnot? What's the history of North Korea?
North and South Korea were divided as a legacy of the Second World War, probably unintended, where the United States and the Soviet Union split the country in half for the purpose of taking the surrenders of Japanese troops. Japan had occupied Korea prior to that time. And the division hardened into a permanent division.
So it was intended to be only temporary then?
Intended to be temporary. The plan was that both sides would make preparations in their own half for an entire peninsula election that would elect a government for the entire peninsula, and then Korea would return to being a united, independent country as it had been for centuries prior. But with the pressures of the Cold War, that never happened, and then with the Korean War, division became even more firm as a terrible, bitter rivalry developed between the government in North Korea and the government in South Korea, with each attempting to show that they were the legitimate government of all Korea and doing everything they could to undermine the other.
How long did the honeymoon last when it says, okay, we're going to choose an elected leader, etc., and we're going to reunite? I mean, they initially made the agreement, but how long did that agreement last before they became very, how would you say, animosity oriented?
Within a couple of years, it was clear that it would never happen.
Oh, so it was
I would say there was never a honeymoon. It was always very.
It was on paper then.
It was in theory, but
Okay.
from day one, both sides were maneuvering to try to get their guy to win.
So the North went with the Soviets, the South went basically with the U.S., the Western allies.
Yeah, although arguably the Soviets had less of an influence over the North. All the Soviet troops got out in pretty short order, whereas in the South, the Americans had to stay around because there was so much agitation. There was a lot of opposition to the figures that the Americans were backing.
Was there a fear that when the association with the Soviet Union in the North, that they would not be able to make it on their own? I'm sneaking up on a term that the Koreans use for self-reliance, and is it called
Juche.
Juche. Could you define what Juche is and what's the meaning?
Yeah, it literally means self-reliance. I would say it's not necessarily the actual policy that North Korea has followed, but the North Koreans have held it up as one of the reasons why North Koreans should feel like they're the more authentic of the two Koreas. I mentioned that there's a rivalry between North and South. So the North Korean argument has been, we are truly independent. We kicked out the Soviet troops soon after we were stood up, and we have the mandate to rule the entire country. Whereas part of their argument is that the South Korean government only survived because of American help and then the actual presence of American soldiers. And there's some merit in that argument.
So we stood up against the Soviet Union. We're now independent, but isn't North Korea pretty dependent on China in terms of food and energy and stuff?
Of course they are.
So they're still not totally self-reliant in any way, shape, or form.
Much of the official North Korean ideology is questionable, let's say, and that's part of it.
Was it, how did you pronounce it?
Juche.
Juche. Isn't part of that the worship of the Kim Il-sung and on down to Kim Jong-un now? I mean, there's got to be the strong leader. Did that become a transplant of basically a Soviet model of the, I guess you would say the Khrushchev in those, or who was it? When the Korean War, who was running? It was a model, was it Stalin and Brezhnev? And
it's an echo of the Stalinist cult of personality. It was an effort, just as Stalin used it to solidify his position as the paramount leader in the Soviet Union. So Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of the current leader, used that same method to solidify his position against domestic rivals. In effect, it became a national religion that the current leader, Kim Jong-un, benefits from today.
How do you make a religion out of a person?
If you have control of the media, control of the education system, you explain to your fellow faction members that as I rise, you will rise also, and if I fall, you will fall. You create a totalitarian system where no one is allowed to argue against the idea. Then you can make whatever argument you wish without opposition.
Do you have any background on Kim Il-sung or the son and now the present, sort of their education, their background, idiosyncrasies, etc.?
Kim Il-sung, by all accounts, was someone who had some basis for being qualified to be installed as a national leader. He was a guerrilla fighter during the war. He received Soviet military training. He held a rank in the Soviet Red Army toward the end of the war.
High ranking, or? I
believe he was a major. But there would not have been many Koreans who held even that rank in the Soviet Red Army. So he was a guy who proved himself in battle, was charismatic. The Russians chose him on the merits to be the first leader of North Korea. But from there, the succeeding generations, you could say, went downhill. Whereas Kim Il-sung, you have to grudgingly admit some respect for him, although he turned out to be a terrible tyrant. His son had a pampered, sheltered upbringing and inherited the mantle as in effect the son of God, without earning any of those accolades himself.
I mean, like theological. I mean,
I describe the political culture of North Korea as being basically a political religion. So as part of the cult of personality, Kim Il-sung and his relatives are more or less deified. They're superhuman. There were supernatural phenomena attended at their birth. Whenever they play golf, they shoot a hole in one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Whether they make it or not. Right. And by the way, Karen, jump in on any of this stuff.
That's okay. I always learn every time I listen to Denny.
But if you got some inside baseball on any of these things, particularly the young man who now is a leader was a graduate of the military. He studied in Switzerland, evidently.
Yeah, he studied in Switzerland. Well,
did he get a degree, or?
I'm not sure how many years he spent in school in Switzerland, but it would have been in his younger years. It wasn't college. But back to the question of the family background. So I would argue that there was a dramatic drop in quality and qualifications from the grandfather Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il. But there's an equally big drop from that middle generation to the current ruler Kim Jong-un. When he was handed the job of being first supreme commander of the military and then a few weeks later paramount leader of the country, he had basically no qualifications other than being a relative, a direct descendant of Kim Il-sung.
He's the oldest son? so to speak?
He's not the older.
He was not even the oldest.
Yeah, he had two older half-brothers, but for different reasons they didn't work out. One of them you heard about being assassinated a few months ago in Malaysia. Yeah.
Oh, when they threw acid.
Right.
Yeah.
But then when Kim Jong-un got into power, didn't he assassinate two uncles?
Well, he has purged a very high number of high-ranking officials, including his uncle, the man who, from the outside, we presume had the job of being his regent, being his advisor as he learned how to do the job as a very young man. So evidently, Kim Jong-un got to the point where he decided he didn't need the regent anymore. So just to...
Is that the only motivation? Like, I've used you and now I want to throw you away? Or is there some... I mean, very few people even know half of what the story is. I mean, this is kind of the inside baseball in the intrigue. But
Yeah.
he got rid of them because he had used them up, so to speak, as a regent, and he was a toss away? Or...
Well, in this case, the actual stated reason for getting rid of him was that he had committed crimes involving serious corruption and been disloyal to his post and to the country. Some of that might have been true. He may have had some kind of side deal going.
Could he have stolen a poster on a wall? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead to a really contemporary with a young college student, Bramler, or I forget how his name is.
Warmbier, Otto
Warmbier was accused of stealing a poster, and 17 months gets back in a state of basically non-function. Then he dies 2 days later.
Well, that gives you an idea of what many hundreds of thousands of North Koreans have had to put up with. It being at the wrong end of a very brutal and ruthless regime.
I had read where there's almost 99 million people who have died at the hands of the North Korean regime, either by starvation or by truth. Let's say when you round them up, and if they don't speak, they're done away with. So it must be a brutal regime.
Well, certainly one of the methods that the regime uses to stay in power is to create a climate of fear. And it is a very pervasive and very acute sense of fear, so that the elites, the generals, are afraid to even think about, let alone communicate.
Okay, I'm going to use that as a transitional statement to where we are now in Hawaii with a little bit of, I'd say, fear, a little bit of anxiety. The Senate and the House had Ricky Ellison of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance come and say, you know, we're about 20 minutes away from a rocket from North Korea to Hawaii. And now I'm going to transition to where in the Beer Summit, Dr. Denny Roy was an expert on speaking to our group in Hawaii Kai, all about what's going on in North Korea, about its capacity for missile, not only experiments, but actually delivery as far as Guam now, evidently. Is that correct? Their capacity to deliver?
Well, some North Korean missiles could go that far. The second issue is whether a missile could carry successfully a nuclear warhead that far and go off. And the third issue is accuracy. So the North Korean missiles, they need range, accuracy, and for the warhead to work upon re-entering.
But they got the warhead. They have the nuclear capacity.
They can explode a bomb, but having a bomb explode after riding to its target on a missile is a different matter. The bomb has to be miniaturized, has to survive re-entry. So I would say the North Koreans up to now have demonstrated range. So they could range Guam. Whether they could hit Guam if they're trying to hit Guam is another matter. Whether they could carry a nuclear weapon and explode it on a particular point is also
according to the map of death, there's 4 targets, and because you inspired me to do some research, the map of death has Pearl Harbor, the San Diego Naval Base, the Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, and then the Pentagon. So Guam is, you sort of sense that's kind of a measuring device of its range, but the real, if we take map of death seriously, should we take North Korea seriously? Should this be an issue that we're really concerned with and should be anxious about it, fearful about it? But there was a resolution in the last session to where these bomb shelters should be re-evaluated and restructured, if you will, or at least be usable. Is that an overreaction?
Of course, we should be concerned that a bitter adversary of the United States is on the path to getting a nuclear missile. But the question is, how do we react, and how much do we react? I think it's important for your viewers to understand that the main reason we fear the idea of North Korea getting a nuclear missile is that we all think that North Korea is crazy. This is an image that's been cultivated by the media and even by our politicians. So if you ask any American on the street, what's the first word that comes to your mind? If I mention North Korea, it will be crazy or unpredictable or erratic, something to that
Senator
effect.
McCain calls him the crazy fat kid.
Yeah, and he should know better. I have no objection to insulting Kim Jong-un, but crazy is the wrong word to use.
Yeah, and that's well taken. I totally agree that somebody who can do that and survive and still be on where he is, he's not a crazy guy. He's rationally premeditated, even though probably malevolent.
Well, here's the most important point of our program. He is ruthless, and he is using a strategy of extreme bravado to try to compensate for North Korea's sense of weakness, the regime's sense of insecurity within the country and without the country. And that is why it is to his advantage that he cultivates fear in our minds that he might use a nuclear weapon.
If we go back to the Cold War, how it was resolved was the MAD strategy, the mutually assured destruction. We kind of said to the Soviet Union, look, we can destroy you, you can destroy us. Is he trying to kind of get into that MAD game to where then he can leverage on the international level different things diplomatically or economically? Or in other words, what's in it for him once he's got his ego and I got nuclear power and deterrence? What's I guess down the line?
Game?
Yeah. What do you get out of that? Being in the I'm in the nuclear. I got my elbows on the table. I have a nuclear bomb, and my people are starving, and I got people in jail. What do I do next with this?
Well, getting a nuclear weapon, he thinks, solves his two big problems in his America policy. First one is to deter the Americans from attacking. And the second is it gives him leverage, he hopes. It makes North Korea an equal. It forces the United States to come to the bargaining table and talk about what North Korea wants to talk about, rather than allowing the United States to ignore North Korea.
Wasn't there a President Clinton negotiation where there would be so many 100 tons of food if they would back off on some of their nuclear advancement? And some of the promises didn't work out, so they never got the food, but it was really the tons of food that they wanted to leverage.
Well, we're still taking that same basic approach in the United States toward North Korea, and that is that if you will get rid of your nuclear weapons, and we can be confident that you've actually done it, then we have lots of benefits that we're willing to consider sharing with you, both political and economic. But we go nowhere until you first at least say that you're committed to giving up your nuclear weapons, which they have not been doing. They've been saying the opposite.
But even aside from nuclear weapons, don't they have enough of their armaments aimed at South Korea or Seoul, which is, 16, 20 miles away from the border? Is there enough damage that they can do to the South Koreans that that's enough to protect our ally in the South to where we don't want to provoke too much to the North? Case in point, we put the THAAD missile defense system in there in May, and then on June 7th, we pulled back. Do you have a theory of why we did that? I have one.
Pulled back on the THAAD?
Yeah.
Well, it was the South Korean president who
Oh, when he ran against, we're not going to get too close to that. There's no basis of this other than my perception of when the president of China and the president of the United States were having dinner in Florida. I think there was Trump, I think, leaned on the president and said, look, you got to get these North Koreans under control. You got to pull back on some of that stuff. And I think, and if he said, okay, we'll do it, but you got to pull the THAAD out, I mean, it looks like a horse trade of sorts, but there's no reason why THAAD shouldn't be there, because that can protect the South Koreans, even though the South Korean president may not see it as such. One presidential campaign promise doesn't make a whole nation's foreign policy, but in this case, it's one of the reasons we're doing that.
On THAAD, the horse trade is really between South Korea and China. That is, China is attempting to pressure the South Korean, now the new president, to order THAAD taken out, or at least to not deploy the other 4 launchers, in just the 2 that are already operational. The horse trade between President Trump and President Xi seems to have been that President Trump might have been considering some tougher measures against North Korea, perhaps to include a military strike. And he was certainly considering following up on his campaign promises with regard to the trade relationship between the United States and China. And he seems to have been persuaded by President Xi's assurances that he would do more on North Korea to hold back on those things. But as of this week, it looks like Mr. Trump is beginning to lose patience.
Is Beijing in missile range of the North Korean missiles? I would think it's close.
Some missiles. Again, we don't know yet that the North Koreans can launch a nuclear weapon and have it work on any of their missiles. But some of the North Korean missiles, at least as we've seen in tests up until now, without nuclear weapons, can certainly range Beijing.
So if we fast forward another 6 months, have you got a crystal ball, Dr. Roy?
I don't expect the North Koreans to have demonstrated a capability to launch a nuclear missile in 6 months, but it won't be long thereafter. I think that the United States will have come to realize that China is not going to be able to deliver on North Korea.
The amount of tests that they've had is almost doubled over the last few years. It was like in 2012 they did 4, 2016 they did 23 missile tests. And then, to me, the scary part is that the nuclear delivery is now to the point where when they first did their detonation, and it is in the mountain, they can blow up stuff in the mountains, but now they've got the capacity of what we blew in the Second World War at Hiroshima. They have now that nuclear capacity, which the National Intelligence Agency has verified. That TNT tonnage, which is huge. Yeah. Hiroshima was a huge explosion. That tells me that if they can get it far enough, the dangers are going to be, well, pretty devastating. If they do it and I know it's not the crazy theory, but if it's where some of these things are going to happen, what are we going to do? Any closing comments? We've suddenly run out of time between what happens between now and...
Well, Gene, as an alum, East West Center, we're going to have a conference in Seoul next August 2018. So we're moving ahead. So Denny, make sure that they're... Yeah, so the fact is that we're looking forward to that, that conference, and so we're hoping things will stabilize between.
And he's going to be one of the guest speakers.
Well, we may have to bring him, make sure he'll take care of everything.
Inviting all of these North Korean friends and allies.
But the fact I've just come from South Korea, Seoul, and people there are very aware. They walk around, aware of it, but it just doesn't, it's not, they walk around knowing that the DMZ is from here to the North Shore. That's how close it is.
Oh, that's a good way of reminding people.
Yeah.
Between here and the North Shore.
That's the DMZ, so from Seoul. Wow. So that's why they're in a 24-hour constant state of readiness, and so they're always aware, and yet they still go about their lives. Seoul's an amazing city.
Thank you for that information, and thank you for the added intellectual firepower for people in Hawaii to understand that this is not going to go away for immediate purposes, but we've run out of time. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
Gene,
Denny, for
You're welcome.
All this subject. And thank you for watching A Word with Ward. I'm Representative Gene Ward and saying aloha and mahalo.